Rampage, 2018, brought together a cast of seasoned professionals and rising stars, blending blockbuster charisma with action credibility. The ensemble was led by Dwayne Johnson, whose global stardom and magnetic presence were a major driving force behind the film's appeal. Alongside him, actors like Naomie Harris, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Malin Ackerman, and Joe Manganiello brought varied backgrounds and unique energies that elevated the film beyond a typical video game adaptation. At the center of the story is Dwayne Johnson, who played Davis Okoye, a primatologist with a military background and a special bond with an albino gorilla named George. Johnson, known affectionately to many as The Rock, had already established himself as a major Hollywood action star prior to Rampage. From his early wrestling fame in the WWE to breakout roles in films like The Rundown, Walking Tall, and later the Fast and Furious franchise, Johnson proved himself to be more than just a physically imposing figure. His career trajectory showed a strategic pivot toward roles that blended strength with empathy and humor. In Rampage, he brought all of these traits to his performance, creating a character that was both tough and compassionate. The relationship between Davis and George was the emotional anchor of the film, and Johnson's performance helped sell that bond to audiences, even when acting opposite a CG creature. The success of Rampage further solidified his ability to carry effects-heavy blockbusters and reinforced his brand as a family-friendly action hero with emotional depth. Naomie Harris played Dr. Kate Caldwell, a geneticist with a complicated past who becomes Davis's ally in stopping the genetically mutated animals wreaking havoc. Harris was already critically acclaimed for her dramatic performances, particularly in films like Moonlight, for which she received an Academy Award nomination, and her role as Eve Moneypenny in the James Bond franchise. Her inclusion in Rampage brought a sense of credibility and seriousness to the film. She portrayed Kate as intelligent, grounded, and emotionally resilient, helping to balance the film's more over-the-top elements. Harris's involvement in an action-packed, effects-driven film like Rampage showcased her versatility and ability to cross genres, from independent dramas to large-scale commercial hits. Jeffrey Dean Morgan took on the role of Harvey Russell, a mysterious government agent who initially seems like an antagonist but ultimately aids Davis and Kate. Morgan was best known for his charismatic and menacing portrayal of Negan on The Walking Dead, and his work in Rampage continued that streak of playing characters who straddle the line between ally and adversary. Morgan's performance was marked by a southern drawl, laid-back confidence, and sharp wit, which added levity to the film and made his character stand out even in a cast filled with dynamic personalities. Though the role didn't necessarily redefine his career, it allowed him to reach broader international audiences and reaffirmed his status as a scene stealer in ensemble casts. Malin Ackerman portrayed Claire Wyden, the ruthless CEO behind the genetic experiments that unleash chaos. Ackerman had previously starred in a range of genres, including comedies like The Heartbreak Kid and romantic films like 27 Dresses, but she had also delved into more intense roles, such as her portrayal of Silk Spectre 2 in Watchmen. In Rampage, she leaned fully into the villain role, delivering a performance that was cold, calculated, and unapologetically evil. Claire was a corporate antagonist through and through, and Ackerman's ability to combine charm with cruelty made her memorable. Her role added a layer of corporate satire to the film and highlighted her range as an actress who could shift from lighthearted roles to dark, manipulative figures with ease. Joe Manganiello had a smaller but notable role as Burke, a mercenary hired to capture the mutated wolf known as Ralph. Though his screen time was limited, Manganiello's physical presence and intense energy made an impression. Known for his roles in True Blood and Magic Mike, he brought a sense of danger and grit to Rampage. The character of Burke was ultimately more of a narrative tool to show the threat posed by the creatures, but Manganiello's performance added gravitas to what could have been a throwaway role. His work in Rampage reflected his continued interest in action-oriented roles and solidified his appeal as a dependable supporting actor in genre films. Jake Lacy, who played Brett Wyden, Claire's brother and a bumbling co-conspirator, offered comic relief in contrast to the film's chaos. Previously known for roles in sitcoms like The Office and more grounded films like Obvious Child, Lacey's inclusion in Rampage demonstrated how comedic actors can be effectively utilized in blockbuster settings to lighten the tone. His character's incompetence and eventual comeuppance were played for laughs, and he leaned into the absurdity of the role, providing a human counterpoint to the destruction caused by monsters. There was also Jason Liles, who performed the motion capture for George, the giant albino gorilla. Although he wasn't a traditional cast member in the same way, his performance was essential. Trained in creature acting and movement, Liles helped bring George to life with subtle gestures and expressions that made the character emotionally resonant despite being rendered through visual effects. The chemistry between Johnson and Liles, though mediated by technology, played a crucial role in anchoring the film's emotional core. Motion capture performances often go underappreciated, but Liles's work demonstrated how much skill and empathy is required to convey personality through digital creatures. The cast of Rampage was a strategic combination of star power, talent, and genre flexibility. Each actor brought something distinct to the film, helping it rise above its video game adaptation roots. Dwayne Johnson's involvement ensured a broad audience, but the supporting cast added layers of humor, intensity, and emotional grounding. For many of the actors, Rampage wasn't necessarily a career-defining film, but it provided them a chance to flex new muscles, whether comedic, dramatic, or physically demanding. It also opened doors for further involvement in big-budget productions and reinforced their ability to succeed in the blockbuster space. The film's success at the global box office, grossing over $428 million, reflected the strength of the cast and their ability to connect with audiences. It also proved that even a film based on a simplistic arcade game could thrive with the right performances and chemistry. In retrospect, Rampage stands as a testament to the importance of casting in elevating genre films and transforming a high-concept idea into something emotionally engaging and entertaining. The collective work of the cast was instrumental in making Rampage not just a monster spectacle, but a story that connected through its characters. Rampage, released in 2018, entered the cultural conversation at a time when audiences were increasingly drawn to nostalgic reboots, video game adaptations, and effects-driven spectacle. While it may not have ignited a seismic shift in cinematic history, the film managed to carve out a unique place in popular culture by blending a classic arcade legacy with contemporary blockbuster storytelling. Its cultural impact and historical significance lie not only in its ability to successfully adapt a minimal source material video game into a globally successful film, but also in the way it tapped into certain trends, moods, and audience appetites of the late 2010s. To begin with, Rampage was part of the ongoing movement of adapting video games into films, a trend that has historically struggled to achieve critical acclaim or mainstream acceptance. Most video game movies prior to 2018 were either commercial failures or plagued by negative reception. However, Rampage broke away from that pattern by delivering a film that was self-aware, entertaining, and anchored by a major movie star. Although the original arcade game released in the 1980s had a bare-bones premise, monsters destroying cities, the film used that simplicity as a creative canvas, expanding the narrative while staying true to the core idea. In doing so, Rampage demonstrated that video game adaptations didn't need complex source material to succeed. They just needed a compelling cinematic experience. This gave studios greater confidence in adapting games with less established narratives, shifting the approach to how video game properties could be reimagined for the screen. The film also tapped into a growing cultural nostalgia for 80s and 90s media. During the 2010s, audiences saw a resurgence of interest in retro pop culture, from reboots like Stranger Things to the return of classic arcade aesthetics in everything from fashion to music videos. Rampage capitalized on this sentiment by bringing an iconic but somewhat forgotten game to modern viewers, many of whom remembered playing it in arcades or on home consoles. This sense of nostalgia, coupled with the excitement of seeing the game's kaiju-inspired destruction in a live-action format, struck a chord with older millennials and Gen X viewers. Furthermore, Rampage's release during a time of heightened global tensions and societal stress, political division, environmental anxieties, and concerns over unchecked corporate power, meant that its themes resonated more than expected. Although primarily designed as entertainment, the film's storyline involving unethical scientific experiments, corporate greed, and the unpredictable consequences of manipulating nature echoed real-world fears. The antagonists, Claire and Brett Wyden, represented a critique of profit-driven science and the lack of accountability in corporate biotech ventures. Audiences recognized these themes as more than just plot devices. They reflected broader societal debates about ethics in technology, gene editing, and environmental stewardship. Rampage also made waves in how it portrayed interspecies friendship and communication. The bond between Davis and George went beyond mere spectacle. It was a story about empathy, understanding, and loyalty. The film portrayed animals not simply as mindless monsters, but as beings capable of emotion and trust. This aligned with the increasing popularity of animal advocacy movements and documentaries highlighting animal intelligence. Viewers, especially younger audiences, responded positively to the portrayal of George not just as a giant gorilla, but as a character with personality, humor, and emotion. Memes and GIFs of George's expressive moments circulated online, often repurposed for humorous or touching social media posts. In this way, George became a minor internet icon, symbolizing a kind of misunderstood outsider whose heart remained pure despite the chaos around him. Speaking of internet culture, Rampage also found a second life through memes and social media engagement. Although it wasn't a meme factory in the way some films are intentionally crafted to be, several moments from the movie, particularly George's middle finger gag or his playful interactions with Davis, became popular on Twitter, Reddit, and Instagram. Users repurposed scenes from the film to comment on everyday frustrations, political incompetence, or absurd situations, which helped extend the film's visibility far beyond its theatrical run. In this way, Rampage entered the memeverse, joining the ranks of other action films that took on a new life through internet humor and fan-made content. The film also contributed to Dwayne Johnson's ever-growing cultural footprint. By 2018, Johnson had become more than just a movie star. He was a brand unto himself, embodying motivation, hard work, and charisma. Rampage's success reinforced his role as a global ambassador of blockbuster entertainment. His presence in the film drew fans who might not otherwise have been interested in a monster movie, and his engagement with fans on social media before, during, and after the film's release further cemented Rampage as part of his cultural narrative. His playful attitude about the film, often poking fun at the absurdity of the premise while celebrating the film's scale and heart, helped audiences approach it with the right expectations, pure popcorn entertainment with a surprisingly tender core. In international markets, especially in Asia, Rampage found strong box office performance. The film's limited dialogue, emphasis on visual spectacle, and universal themes of loyalty and heroism made it highly accessible across language and cultural barriers. This global success was another indication of the changing nature of Hollywood filmmaking, where international appeal was increasingly prioritized. Rampage was one of several films in the late 2010s that showed how science fiction and action-heavy stories, especially those involving creatures and destruction, resonated with a wide audience across different cultures. The movie's performance in China, in particular, underscored the growing importance of that market to Hollywood's global strategy. Additionally, Rampage can be seen as part of a larger trend of disaster films that use destruction as metaphor. While the film featured citywide demolition and massive battles, it also highlighted how human error, unchecked ambition, and ecological tampering could lead to ruin. In a way, the monster carnage was a stand-in for the kind of systemic chaos caused by real-world issues like climate change, pandemics, or corporate malfeasance. The cities crumbling under the weight of mutated animals mirrored the growing awareness that modern society is more fragile than it appears. Even if viewers weren't consciously connecting these dots, the undercurrent of vulnerability and survival was palpable. The making of Rampage was an ambitious undertaking that involved a blend of high-octane action, complex visual effects, and human storytelling. Adapting a 1986 arcade game with limited narrative into a full-scale blockbuster required creativity, vision, and a willingness to push technical and logistical boundaries. Behind the scenes, the production of Rampage was marked by a mixture of challenges, innovations, personal relationships, and unexpected moments that helped shape the final film. From location scouting to motion capture sessions, every element of the filmmaking process was orchestrated to bring the monsters and mayhem to life in a way that would feel both thrilling and emotionally grounded. Director Brad Peyton, who had previously worked with Dwayne Johnson on films like Journey 2, The Mysterious Island, and San Andreas, was chosen to helm the project. Their creative partnership had already proven successful, and the pair shared a mutual trust that would become essential during the filming of Rampage. Peyton approached the film with a clear understanding of the genre's demands, but he also wanted to ensure that the heart of the story, the bond between Davis Okoye and George, wasn't overshadowed by visual spectacle. Peyton often spoke about his desire to ground the action in emotional stakes, giving audiences a reason to care about the destruction they were watching unfold on screen. Filming began in April 2017, with principal photography taking place largely in Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta had become a major hub for Hollywood productions due to favorable tax incentives and a versatile urban landscape that could double for various cities. For Rampage, Atlanta stood in for Chicago during the climactic third act of the film, where George, the mutated wolf Ralph, and the flying crocodile Lizzie wreak havoc across the skyline. The filmmakers used a combination of practical sets and green screens to simulate the destruction of downtown Chicago, blending real-world streets with digital environments. Large-scale outdoor sequences required carefully coordinated stunts, controlled demolitions, and simulated debris, all executed with precision to ensure safety and realism. One of the most technically demanding aspects of the production was the creation of the creatures. George, Ralph, and Lizzie were entirely computer-generated, but their performances were rooted in human movement. Actor and creature performer Jason Liles was brought on to embody George through motion capture. Liles, who had previously studied animal behavior and physicality, spent months preparing for the role. He closely observed gorillas at zoos, practiced their mannerisms, and worked with movement coaches to replicate their posture and gestures. During filming, Liles wore a motion capture suit and head rig with facial tracking technology, allowing his expressions and movements to be translated directly onto the digital character. This method of performance capture, while increasingly common in blockbuster filmmaking, required intense collaboration between Liles and Dwayne Johnson. Many of their scenes together were filmed with Liles physically present on set, acting opposite Johnson, which helped create authentic emotional exchanges. Johnson later praised Liles for his dedication and described their interactions as vital to making the relationship between Davis and George feel believable. Their chemistry wasn't just a result of visual effects, it came from real performances, eye contact, and mutual respect. In terms of production challenges, weather played a significant role. Several outdoor scenes had to be rescheduled due to unpredictable conditions, particularly during night shoots in downtown Atlanta. Controlling lighting and visibility for large-scale action scenes at night required intricate rigging and setups. In one sequence involving a helicopter crash, wind machines and rain towers had to simulate a storm while stunt performers coordinated a high-risk escape. Brad Peyton emphasized the importance of capturing as much in camera as possible to give the film a tactile, grounded feel, even with the inclusion of CG monsters. The destruction sequences, especially in the final act, were carefully choreographed using pre-visualization, Previse software. Entire scenes were built digitally before filming began, allowing the team to plan camera angles, timing, and visual effects integration with precision. One notable example is the collapse of the Willis Tower, formerly Sears Tower, a fictionalized moment in the film that required extensive digital modeling and compositing. Although the tower wasn't physically destroyed, artists at the visual effects studio Watafx created such a detailed simulation that it appeared devastatingly real on screen. Watafx, known for its groundbreaking work on films like Avatar and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, was the lead visual effects house on Rampage. The studio worked closely with the filmmakers to design creatures that felt biologically plausible, despite their monstrous size. George was based on an albino silverback gorilla, and his muscle structure for texture and facial expressions were rendered with meticulous attention to detail. Lizzie, the crocodilian monster, drew inspiration from a mix of reptiles and prehistoric creatures, featuring scales, fins, and horns that gave her a unique silhouette. Ralph, the flying wolf, incorporated elements of porcupines and bats to create a hybrid that was both terrifying and visually distinct. While the CG monsters were central to the film, many action sequences involved practical stunts and props. Dwayne Johnson performed many of his own stunts, including running through collapsing sets and performing wire-assisted jumps. The production also used large-scale sets for scenes set inside military hangars, laboratories, and the headquarters of Energyne, the villainous biotech company. These sets were designed with intricate detail, using real materials and textures to enhance immersion. One set, built to resemble a laboratory that had been torn apart during an animal attack, featured broken glass, overturned furniture, and blood effects, all created practically to give actors tangible elements to interact with. Costume design and makeup were also important to grounding the film's more fantastical elements. The team worked to create believable military uniforms, corporate attire, and survival gear that would reflect each character's background and situation. Naomie Harris's character, Kate Caldwell, wore a series of practical outfits designed to show her transition from a lab-based scientist to a field operative navigating chaos. Similarly, Jeffrey Dean Morgan's character, Harvey Russell, had a distinct look that blended Texas lawman with Black Ops agent, including a signature silver pistol that became a character detail all its own. On set, the atmosphere was reportedly collaborative and lighthearted, despite the intensity of the action scenes. Dwayne Johnson, known for his charisma and positive energy, frequently posted behind-the-scenes videos to his social media accounts, showing interactions with cast and crew. These posts helped promote the film but also gave fans a glimpse into the camaraderie on set. During downtime, the cast would often hang out together, with Johnson and Lyles occasionally improvising comedy routines while still in costume or motion capture gear. This sense of fun behind the camera translated into the final film, where even in the midst of chaos, moments of levity and warmth shone through. Rampage's narrative structure is built around a traditional action-adventure framework, but it adds depth through strong character relationships, escalating stakes, and moments of emotional resonance. While the core premise, a group of animals mutated into giant monsters wreaking havoc on a major city, might sound simple or even campy, the filmmakers constructed a story that, while never overly complex, functions well within its genre and offers a satisfying narrative arc. The plot moves swiftly but deliberately, with clear turning points, a central emotional core, and a build-up to a massive, visually intense climax. The film opens with a prologue set aboard a space station owned by the Energyne Corporation. This cold open immediately sets the tone: high tension, a sense of danger, and a hint at the science fiction premise behind the chaos to come. A lone survivor attempts to escape the wreckage, clutching canisters containing samples of a genetic editing serum called Project Rampage. The ensuing destruction of the station results in 3 canisters falling to Earth, each landing in a different location. This scene efficiently introduces the central conflict, rogue genetic experimentation, and primes the audience for a creature-based narrative grounded in science gone wrong. After the prologue, the story shifts to Earth, introducing the film's protagonist, Davis Okoye, a primatologist working at the San Diego Wildlife Sanctuary. Davis is quickly established as a compassionate, capable character with a unique bond with George, a rare albino gorilla. This early section is crucial, as it lays the emotional foundation of the film. Through lighthearted interactions and sign language exchanges, we see that George is intelligent, playful, and deeply connected to Davis. This bond becomes the film's emotional through line, distinguishing it from other monster films that often lack meaningful character connections. The plot escalates when one of the Project Rampage canisters lands in George's habitat. Overnight, George begins to grow rapidly in size and aggression. Davis and his team are baffled and concerned, leading to the introduction of Dr. Kate Caldwell, a former Energyne geneticist who understands the danger of the serum. Kate reveals that Project Rampage was designed to rewrite genetic code and enhance organisms, but its use was meant for military applications. This revelation sets the stage for a race against time to stop the creatures and expose Energyne's corruption. The second act of the film is marked by increasing tension and a sense of pursuit. After George escapes the sanctuary, the film introduces new threats. Ralph, a mutated wolf who can glide and has porcupine-like quills, and Lizzie, a monstrous crocodile mutated into a gargantuan, spiked predator. The narrative shifts into motion as the government becomes involved, specifically the introduction of Harvey Russell, a cowboy-esque operative for the other government agency, OGA, who enters the story as a seemingly antagonistic figure, but eventually allies with Davis and Kate. The structure of the second act is tight and purposeful. Each scene reveals new information about the mutation, the reach of Energyne's unethical practices, and the scale of the impending disaster. Davis and Kate are taken into custody, George is transported in a military plane, and Ralph begins his own destructive journey. The pacing accelerates as the characters become entangled in multiple threads, evading the military, preventing further destruction, and uncovering the corporate conspiracy at the heart of the chaos. The midpoint of the film, a classic narrative turning point, occurs during a dramatic sequence aboard a military aircraft. George, agitated and growing more unstable, breaks free mid-flight, causing the plane to crash. This scene marks a significant shift. Davis survives the crash and realizes the full scale of the threat, while George escapes and heads toward Chicago, drawn by a signal emitted from Energyne's headquarters. This is a classic midpoint reversal, where the heroes suffer a setback and the stakes rise dramatically. As the film moves into the third act, the chaos reaches full scale. Energyne's signal, designed to lure the mutated creatures to Chicago, results in all three monsters converging on the city. Claire and Brett Wyden, the corporate villains, plan to retrieve a sample from George's body once he's dead, hoping to cover up their crimes and continue their research. This leads to a sequence of escalating destruction as the creatures tear through the city's infrastructure. Skyscrapers crumble, military helicopters are swatted from the sky, and panic spreads through the streets. What stands out in the third act is how the film continues to balance spectacle with character. Amidst the destruction, Davis and Kate infiltrate Energyne's tower to retrieve the antidote, a pathogen that can neutralize the animal's aggression but not shrink them. In a particularly memorable sequence, Claire is killed by George after being tricked into carrying the antidote, which she planned to use as leverage. This moment, although darkly humorous, is a key turning point that sets the stage for the emotional resolution. With George cured, though still massive in size, the final battle unfolds between him and the other two creatures. This climactic sequence is a visual feast of CG effects, but it's grounded by Davis and George working together. Davis, injured but relentless, uses a helicopter and a grenade launcher to assist, while George takes on Ralph and Lizzie in hand-to-hand monster combat. This climactic stretch combines action with emotional payoff. George protects Davis, and Davis refuses to abandon his friend despite the danger. The resolution comes as George defeats Lizzie in a brutal final clash, impaling the crocodilian creature and collapsing beside Davis. There's a beat of silence where it appears George has died, and Davis's grief is palpable. However, in a moment designed to tug at the audience's heartstrings, George stirs and jokingly flips Davis off, a callback to an earlier gag and a moment of relief after the intensity of the battle. The film ends on a hopeful note. The city lies in ruins, but George is alive, and the bond between man and beast is stronger than ever. Davis and Kate look out over the wreckage with a sense of quiet triumph, and George helps rescue civilians, hinting at his continued role in society. The final image suggests a return to stability, but with new relationships and understanding forged through the crisis. In terms of structure, Rampage follows a clear three-act model. The first act establishes the world, characters, and inciting incident. The second act builds tension and expands the scope of the threat, introducing subplots and character motivations. The third act brings all narrative threads to a head in an explosive climax and emotional resolution. Within this framework, the story uses traditional beats, midpoint shift, all is lost moment, climax, and denouement, effectively, even if it doesn't reinvent them. While Rampage doesn't rely heavily on plot twists, it does feature a few surprises that subvert expectations. Claire Wyden's death, for example, comes unexpectedly and is both satisfying and ironic. Harvey Russell's shift from antagonist to ally is another minor twist that enriches the character dynamics. The film avoids unnecessary complications, choosing instead to keep the story accessible and fast-moving. While Rampage is primarily known for its large-scale action, towering monsters, and citywide destruction, underneath its bombastic exterior lies a surprising depth of thematic exploration. The film takes what could have easily been a shallow premise, mutant animals attacking a city, and embeds within it ideas about friendship, loyalty, corporate greed, environmental irresponsibility, and the consequences of playing God. These themes are expressed through character relationships, narrative arcs, and symbolic imagery that, while not always subtle, add layers of meaning to the film's spectacle. At its heart, Rampage is a story about connection, particularly the deep, loyal bond between Davis Okoye and George. Their relationship is not only central to the narrative, but also symbolic of trust between species and the idea that communication and empathy can transcend differences. Davis, a former Special Forces operative who has turned his attention to wildlife conservation, has deliberately chosen the company of animals over humans, believing them to be more honest and less dangerous. His bond with George represents the possibility of finding kinship outside traditional human relationships. Throughout the film, this connection is tested and reaffirmed, symbolizing themes of loyalty, mutual respect, and emotional intelligence. The transformation of George into a giant, aggressive creature serves as a metaphor for how external forces, whether science, society, or trauma, can distort and endanger the very things we love. Even as George becomes more dangerous, Davis refuses to abandon him, embodying the theme of unconditional loyalty. This refusal to give up on George mirrors real-world relationships where individuals must support loved ones through periods of instability or change. Ultimately, George's return to his true self after receiving the antidote reinforces the idea that identity can be preserved even in the face of overwhelming change, so long as there's a strong emotional foundation. Another major theme in Rampage is the danger of unchecked ambition, particularly within the realm of corporate science. The Energyne Corporation, led by Claire and Brett Wyden, is portrayed as the epitome of corporate irresponsibility, willing to sacrifice human lives, cities, and ecosystems in pursuit of profit and technological dominance. Their genetic experiments, originally intended to enhance physical traits in organisms for military purposes, become a symbol of hubris. Like the myth of Prometheus or the cautionary tales of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Rampage warns of the consequences that can arise when science is driven by greed rather than ethics. Claire's unrelenting focus on capitalizing on the Rampage virus, even as chaos unfolds around her, illustrates a theme that resonates with modern anxieties about corporations having too much power and too little accountability. Her demise, brought on not by a heroic intervention but by her own deception backfiring, symbolizes poetic justice. Her death at the hands of George after she tries to use the antidote as a shield is both literal and metaphorical. She is devoured by the very forces she sought to exploit. The mutated animals themselves serve as visual and narrative symbols. Each creature represents an exaggerated version of humanity's impact on nature. George, initially a peaceful animal, becomes aggressive and destructive due to external manipulation, suggesting how tampering with natural order can lead to unintended consequences. Ralph, the wolf with enhanced aggression and unnatural abilities, can be seen as a symbol of weaponized nature, a creature altered for violence without regard for balance or control. Lizzie, the crocodile mutated into an enormous, armor-plated behemoth, symbolizes the monstrous consequences of compounding evolutionary traits with artificial enhancements. Together, these creatures become avatars of nature fighting back, albeit under manipulation. Their destruction of the city is not just a plot device, but a metaphor for how scientific overreach and environmental neglect can boomerang back upon humanity. Skyscrapers crumble, planes fall from the sky, and monuments are reduced to rubble, not just because of the creatures themselves, but because the systems designed to control them failed. In this way, the cityscape becomes a symbol of human achievement that is ultimately vulnerable to its own arrogance. Another recurring theme is redemption. Davis is introduced as a loner with a painful past. Once involved in anti-poaching efforts, he has withdrawn from human society due to trauma and disappointment. His arc is one of re-engagement. Through his mission to save George and protect innocent lives, he rediscovers his capacity for connection, trust, and leadership. This redemptive journey reflects a larger theme, that even those who isolate themselves can find purpose and healing through relationships and action. Similarly, Dr. Kate Caldwell is seeking redemption for her past involvement in Energine's unethical practices. Her decision to help stop the creatures is a way of making amends, and her determination to take down her former employers shows a willingness to confront past mistakes. The theme of resilience also runs through the narrative. Despite overwhelming odds, the protagonists persist in their mission. Their resilience is not just physical, but emotional. Davis refuses to give in to despair. Kate pushes through personal loss, and George, despite his transformation, retains a glimmer of his original personality. Their perseverance is symbolic of the human, and in George's case, animal, capacity to endure and overcome, even when the world seems to be falling apart. Humor in the film also plays a symbolic role. George's gestures, his mischievous sense of humor, and his bond with Davis add levity to the destruction around them. This humor is not merely comic relief. It humanizes the monster and reminds the audience that beneath the mutated exterior is a creature capable of emotion, memory, and playfulness. George's final middle finger gag, for instance, serves as both a callback and a symbol of retained identity. He may be a giant monster now, but he's still George, still capable of joking with his friend, still fundamentally himself. Symbolism extends into the visual language of the film. The use of scale is a constant visual reminder of the imbalance between humanity and the creatures. Characters are frequently shown dwarfed by the monsters, highlighting their vulnerability and the enormity of the threat. But scale also shifts during moments of empowerment. When Davis takes action, or when George protects civilians, the framing brings them visually closer to eye level with the monsters, suggesting that emotional strength can bridge even the largest physical divides. The city of Chicago, where the final act takes place, is symbolic as well. A hub of industry and architecture, it represents human progress and civilization. Its destruction is not random. It's a thematic reflection of nature striking back at human overreach. The willful targeting of the Energine Tower, the source of the radio signal drawing the monsters, further underscores the theme that the source of the problem must be confronted and dismantled. The tower becomes a symbol of corporate dominance, and its collapse signifies the fall of unchecked ambition. The visual style of Rampage is an essential part of its identity. As a modern blockbuster, the film leans heavily on dynamic visuals to tell its story, using cinematography, lighting, color palettes, framing, and visual effects to enhance emotion, tension, and spectacle. What separates Rampage from other similar creature features is how it balances massive-scale destruction with intimate character moments, never allowing the size of the visuals to overwhelm the human core of the narrative. Cinematographer Jaron Presant and director Brad Peyton crafted a visual language that supports the dual identity of the film, emotionally grounded yet visually explosive. One of the film's most distinct visual decisions is its deliberate contrast between natural environments and urban chaos. The early scenes at the San Diego Wildlife Sanctuary are shot with a warm, earthy color palette. Greens, browns, and soft sunlight dominate the screen. This natural setting is framed with relatively static, calm camera movements, which reflect the peaceful bond between Davis and George. Here, the cinematography emphasizes connection and tranquility. Wide-angle shots allow the audience to appreciate the space and the scale of George in a non-threatening way. Close-ups of George's face and eyes, particularly as he interacts with Davis through sign language, help the viewer emotionally connect with the creature as more than just a spectacle. Once the effects of the Project Rampage serum begin to take hold and George grows more aggressive, the lighting subtly shifts. Scenes become darker, with a slight bluish tint added to night sequences and containment scenes, reinforcing a mood of confusion, danger, and growing instability. Presant and the visual team utilize a change in visual tone to reflect the transformation. What was once serene becomes uncertain and threatening. Shadow and harsh lighting play across George's increasingly monstrous form, visually underlining the internal conflict within the character. As he becomes more physically imposing, the camera adjusts. Lower angles are used to emphasize his size and power, a common technique in creature features, but done here in a way that maintains emotional nuance rather than simply instilling fear. Camera movement becomes significantly more kinetic as the story progresses. Handheld and Steadicam shots are used during scenes of panic, particularly when the creatures begin attacking urban environments. The camera shakes slightly during explosions and destruction to simulate ground-level chaos. In contrast, wide aerial shots are employed to give audiences a sense of scale when showing the monsters moving through cities or confronting each other. This balance between tight, visceral shots and expansive, high-angle perspectives helps the audience understand both the personal danger to the characters and the broader threat to the environment. Chicago, as the primary setting of the film's final act, is used not just as a backdrop, but as a canvas for destruction. Visually, the filmmakers leaned into a gray ametallic aesthetic for the city's skyline, which provides a stark contrast against the organic forms of George, Ralph, and Lizzie. This creates a visual dichotomy between nature, now twisted, and the built environment, symbolizing the film's underlying tension between science and nature. Lighting in these sequences tends to be naturalistic, mimicking daylight to highlight the realism of the destruction. There's no stylized color grading here. The more grounded visual treatment makes the chaos feel plausible, enhancing the stakes. One of the most impressive aspects of the film's cinematography is how it integrates real environments with digital effects. Shooting on location in Atlanta, the filmmakers built practical sets that would later be extended with computer-generated destruction. This required a seamless blend of practical and digital cinematography. Presant worked closely with the VFX team to ensure that the camera angles and lighting on set matched the eventual digital destruction. For example, when George climbs a building or leaps through debris, the real-world lighting cues were matched precisely with CG shadows, motion blur, and dust effects. This attention to visual continuity makes the visual effects feel grounded, which is key in maintaining audience immersion. Rampage's visual effects are particularly noteworthy in how they contribute to the cinematographic style. Rather than simply relying on effects as spectacle, the creatures are integrated into scenes with careful compositional framing. George is often positioned in the center of the frame, especially in emotional scenes, to anchor the viewer's focus. During combat scenes, like the final confrontation between George and Lizzie, the camera tracks movement in long, sweeping motions, avoiding rapid cuts so the audience can fully appreciate the choreography. This is a conscious choice. Many modern action films rely on quick cuts and shaky camera work, but Rampage opts for clarity and flow, giving weight and geography to the action. Special attention was given to the use of lighting to distinguish the three creatures. George, with his pale albino fur, is often lit in softer, more diffuse lighting. This gives him a more sympathetic visual tone and helps maintain his connection to Davis and the audience. Ralph, the wolf, is typically seen at night or in dimly lit environments, often backlit to emphasize his menacing eyes and silhouette. Lizzie, the crocodilian beast, is presented with the most dramatic lighting, harsh, directional beams that catch on her armor-like scales and protruding spikes. These choices not only create visual variety, but also subtly communicate each creature's personality and threat level. Color theory also plays a role in the film's visual storytelling. Davis's clothing, primarily beige, gray, and muted tones, keeps him grounded in the natural world. In contrast, the Energine offices are sterile, white, and cold, filled with blues and silvers that evoke artificiality and detachment. This contrast visually underscores the ideological divide between characters like Davis and the Wyden siblings. Even the lab environments are flooded with stark fluorescent lighting, visually emphasizing the unnatural, clinical approach the corporation takes towards science and ethics. Lighting is also used symbolically throughout the film. Scenes involving trust or personal connection between characters tend to have warmer lighting, such as golden hour backdrops or softer interior lights. Conflict and chaos, on the other hand, are often underscored by strobing lights, dim environments, or flickering fluorescent bulbs, all of which contribute to a sense of instability. One notable moment is when Davis and Kate confront Claire Wyden at the top of the Energyne Tower. The lighting here is sterile and overexposed, almost washed out, symbolizing the moral emptiness of Claire's position, even as the world collapses around her. In a film like Rampage, where the visual spectacle of giant monsters tearing through cities dominates much of the audience's attention, the soundtrack and sound design can often be overlooked. However, in reality, these auditory elements play an equally crucial role in immersing viewers in the chaos, tension, and emotional arcs of the story. The score, composed by Andrew Lockington, and the detailed soundscape crafted by the film's audio team together enhance the intensity, amplify the drama, and provide subtle emotional cues that deepen the audience's engagement with the narrative. Andrew Lockington, who previously collaborated with director Brad Peyton on films like Journey to The Mysterious Island and San Andreas, brought his experience in scoring high-intensity adventure films to Rampage. His approach to the music was not merely to create a bombastic action score, but to layer emotional depth beneath the chaos. The central relationship in the film, that between Davis Okoye and George the Gorilla, forms the heart of the story, and Lockington's score reflects this with recurring melodic themes that evolve as the story progresses. Early scenes of connection between Davis and George are underscored by soft, melodic piano motifs and subdued string arrangements, creating a sense of warmth and familiarity. These motifs subtly reappear throughout the film, even during more intense moments, reminding the audience of the emotional stakes behind the destruction. As the tone of the film shifts and George begins to mutate, the musical score follows suit. The melodies that once felt intimate and peaceful are gradually transformed into darker, more distorted arrangements. Lockington introduces deeper percussion, eerie synthesizers, and dissonant string crescendos to mirror George's internal conflict and growing volatility. The shift in instrumentation plays a subconscious role in preparing the audience for the escalating danger, even before it fully unfolds on screen. This musical evolution also reflects the broader theme of nature being corrupted by science, musical beauty disrupted by mechanical intrusion. One of the most striking aspects of the soundtrack is its use of rhythm. Action scenes are scored with pulsing, percussive energy, often incorporating tribal drums, synthetic bass lines, and rhythmic string stabs. This gives the scenes a heartbeat-like pace that drives the momentum forward. For example, in the scene where George, Ralph, and Lizzie first converge on Chicago, the music builds slowly with layers of tension before exploding into a complex tapestry of percussion and orchestration as the creatures begin their rampage. Lockington uses rhythm not just to accompany action but to dictate pacing. Faster tempos elevate the adrenaline, while sudden drops in tempo or complete silence heighten suspense. Sound design, on the other hand, is the unsung hero of the film's immersive experience. Unlike dialogue or music, which command active attention, sound design operates more subtly, adding texture, realism, and psychological impact. Rampage's sound design is meticulous in its layering. From the smallest ambient details to the thunderous roars of mutated beasts, every sound is intentional and carefully placed within the auditory space. Each of the three primary creatures, George, Ralph, and Lizzie, was given a distinct audio profile to reflect their personalities and biology. George's vocalizations were constructed from a combination of gorilla sounds, digitally enhanced to grow more threatening as his size increases. Early in the film, his sounds resemble those of a real gorilla, playful grunts, hoots, and chest beating. As the serum takes hold, his vocalizations become deeper and more guttural, integrating elements like low-frequency growls and subsonic rumbles to convey weight and danger. But even in his mutated form, the sound designers preserved elements of his original voice to maintain his identity, a subtle cue that he's still George underneath it all. Ralph, the Flying Wolf, features a soundscape rooted in predatory aggression. His growls are sharp, rapid, and clipped, designed to evoke speed and precision. One of the most memorable design choices for Ralph is the sound of his wings. Rather than a simple flap, the sound team constructed a mechanical, almost jet-like whoosh combined with a high-pitched screech as he moves through the air. This hybrid audio evokes both organic and engineered elements, reinforcing the unnaturalness of his mutation. When Ralph attacks, the auditory cues, snapping jaws, claws scraping against concrete, and deep, echoing howls, are designed to disorient and startle, mirroring the shock and panic of those encountering him. Lizzie, the massive crocodilian creature, is the most sonically overwhelming of the trio. Her roars are layered with deep bellows, the rumble of earthquakes, and the grinding sound of shifting rocks. Her movements are accompanied by low-frequency booms and the sounds of massive weight displacing matter. One notable choice in her design is the integration of underwater acoustics. Bubbling, gurgling, and pressure-release hisses are used even on land, subtly reminding the audience of her amphibious origins. When Lizzie moves, the audio physically reverberates, creating a visceral, gut-punching effect. This sound massiveness not only communicates her physical scale, but also instills an overwhelming sense of dread whenever she enters a scene. Environmental sound design plays an equally crucial role. From the moment the creatures begin their assault on Chicago, the city is alive with sonic detail. Buildings groan under stress before collapsing, glass shatters in thousands of high-pitched crystalline bursts, vehicles crumple with a cacophony of metal screams and explosions. Helicopters were overhead, people scream in the distance, car alarms wail, all blending into a dynamic, multi-layered sonic landscape. Rather than a single overwhelming wall of noise, the sound mix carefully differentiates between foreground and background elements, ensuring the audience can track the spatial geography of the action. Silence is used powerfully and sparingly throughout the film. In several moments of emotional resonance, such as when Davis believes George is dying, the score drops out completely and the ambient sound is muted. This technique focuses the audience's attention and elevates the emotional weight. In contrast, in action sequences, sudden silences are used to build tension. Moments before an explosion, a collapse, or a creature reveal, the audio will cut or reduce significantly, cueing the audience to anticipate a major event. The film also incorporates strategic use of directional sound and dynamic mixing. In theaters, Rampage was mixed in Dolby Atmos, allowing for an immersive, three-dimensional audio experience. Sounds track across the speakers from left to right or overhead, following the trajectory of a falling helicopter or a flying wolf. The creature's roars move across the room with their physical movements. This spatial audio enhances realism and immersion, making the audience feel as though they are physically within the scene. This technique is especially effective during the final battle, where George and Lizzie clash amidst crumbling skyscrapers. Each blow, each roar, each environmental collapse is felt, not just heard, due to the carefully orchestrated sound field. The Legacy of Rampage, 2018, is an interesting case in modern Hollywood, not necessarily because the film broke new ground or redefined a genre, but because it solidified a particular kind of blockbuster filmmaking at a time when the industry was in transition. Its influence can be traced through several lenses: commercial viability, the continued evolution of video game adaptations, the branding power of Dwayne Johnson, and the expanding appeal of creature-based spectacles in international markets. Though not often listed among the most groundbreaking films of the decade, Rampage has carved out a modest yet notable place in cinematic history, and its ripple effects can still be observed in both mainstream entertainment and pop culture. Perhaps the most immediate and tangible legacy of Rampage was in its contribution to the conversation around video game movie adaptations. For decades, these adaptations had been plagued by poor critical reception, low box office returns, and accusations of failing to understand or respect their source material. Prior to Rampage, films like Assassin's Creed, Need for Speed, and Prince of Persia attempted to bring complex game worlds to the screen but faltered in execution. Rampage, however, approached the concept from a different angle. It used a minimalistic game as a springboard for a high-concept action story. Rather than trying to faithfully recreate a narrative that didn't exist in the original game, it invented its own while retaining the core appeal of destruction and oversized monsters. This looseness allowed the filmmakers to tell a cinematic story without being shackled by lore or fan expectations, and in doing so, it helped reframe the possibilities of video game movies. This approach proved influential. Future game-based adaptations, such as Sonic the Hedgehog and Detective Pikachu, adopted a similar strategy, taking iconic elements of a franchise and reimagining them within a broader narrative framework that made sense for film. While these later movies leaned more heavily on nostalgia and character recognition, Rampage demonstrated that a game adaptation didn't need intricate plot points or recognizable names to succeed. It needed a compelling hook, a marketable star, and a story that embraced the tone and spirit of its inspiration without trying to mimic gameplay. In terms of box office impact, Rampage's global performance reinforced the importance of international audiences, especially in Asia. With over half its revenue coming from overseas markets, the film joined a growing list of Hollywood blockbusters that leaned heavily on global appeal to secure profitability. Its straightforward premise, giant monsters wreaking havoc in a major city, transcended language and cultural differences. Audiences worldwide could connect with the universal spectacle of destruction, the bond between human and creature, and the larger-than-life heroism of its protagonist. This model of global blockbuster storytelling became increasingly central in Hollywood's strategies post-2018. Rampage also contributed to the career trajectory of Dwayne Johnson, further cementing his reputation as a reliable global box office draw. While he was already a well-established action star before the film, Rampage demonstrated his versatility in leading yet another genre, the creature feature. The film gave him an opportunity to balance action, emotion, and humor, particularly through his relationship with George the gorilla. This performance reinforced his brand identity as a charismatic everyman with superheroic physicality and emotional relatability. In the years following Rampage, Johnson continued to lead films with similar tonal structures, like Jungle Cruise and Red Notice, where he played larger-than-life characters in fantastical settings. Rampage thus played a key role in sustaining the momentum of his cinematic persona and expanding the kinds of stories he could headline. More broadly, Rampage contributed to the resurgence of interest in monster-centric narratives that blend science fiction, action, and disaster tropes. Although films like Pacific Rim and Godzilla, 2014, had already reintroduced kaiju-style creatures to modern audiences, Rampage's unique approach, where the monsters were not entirely villainous and where the central creature was a misunderstood hero, added new dimension to the genre. George, in particular, stood out as a sympathetic beast whose transformation was tragic rather than terrifying. This emotional layering influenced how other films treated their monstrous characters, offering them more agency and complexity rather than portraying them purely as antagonistic forces. In merchandising, Rampage had a brief but noticeable footprint. Toys, collectibles, and video game tie-ins were produced to coincide with the film's release. While it didn't generate the same scale of merchandising success as superhero films or animated franchises, it carved out a niche among fans of monster movies and nostalgic gamers who remembered the original arcade game. The Rampage brand was revitalized, if only for a time, and found a new generation of fans who were introduced to the property through the film rather than the original game. Rampage's influence also extended to visual effects and CGI character performance. The motion capture work used to bring George to life, performed by actor Jason Liles, helped push the standard for how digital creatures could be emotionally expressive. Although Andy Serkis and others had already set a high bar for motion capture performance in films like King Kong and Planet of the Apes, Rampage contributed to the normalization of using mocap in non-franchise, standalone blockbusters. George's subtle facial expressions, body language, and even comedic timing showed that technology could support nuanced, character-driven performances in high-octane action settings. Future films continued to refine this technique, blending digital effects with live action more seamlessly and believably. Critically, Rampage's long-term reputation remains divisive, but generally positive within its genre. It is often cited as one of the better video game adaptations and is frequently mentioned in articles or retrospectives that highlight surprisingly successful game-based films. It didn't revolutionize cinema, but it didn't have to. Its legacy is found in its ability to entertain, to surprise with its emotional beats, and to remind audiences that sometimes a movie about a giant gorilla punching a giant wolf through a skyscraper is exactly what people want to see. One interesting aspect of Rampage's legacy is how it helped reestablish a sense of event cinema around simple, self-contained stories. In a cinematic climate where shared universes, sequels, and interconnected narratives dominate the landscape, Rampage offered something refreshing: a complete story with no cliffhangers, no post-credit scenes teasing a franchise, and no convoluted mythology to unpack. This return to simplicity resonated with some viewers who felt fatigued by the endless serial storytelling of modern blockbusters. In this way, Rampage functioned as a kind of palate cleanser, an old-school popcorn flick with modern visual effects and a fast-paced, no-nonsense approach to storytelling. Audiences often connect with films in ways that are both personal and cultural, interpreting themes, characters, and emotional beats based on their own experiences, generational mindset, and societal context. Rampage, while on the surface a big-budget monster action movie, resonated with viewers in more subtle and layered ways than one might initially expect. Though it may not have sparked the kind of philosophical discussions that come with more overtly thematic films, Rampage managed to embed certain emotional and psychological touchpoints that struck a chord with many people across different age groups, nationalities, and backgrounds. For many audiences, especially younger viewers and families, Rampage was interpreted as an old-fashioned adventure with a heart. Its combination of thrilling action, humor, and the unlikely friendship between a human and a genetically mutated albino gorilla offered something both nostalgic and emotionally satisfying. The relationship between Davis Okoye and George was seen as the film's emotional core, and this bond resonated with viewers who saw it as a symbol of loyalty, nonverbal communication, and mutual trust between beings of different worlds. People who had grown up with animals or worked in animal care, particularly those familiar with primates, found this connection especially moving. Some viewers saw the story of George as a metaphor for loss of innocence and the tragedy of unwanted transformation. Before the genetic experiment, George was intelligent, playful, and safe. Once exposed to the pathogen, his physical form changed and his behavior became erratic and dangerous, mirroring themes of trauma, mutation, and the way external forces can turn a gentle being into something feared and misunderstood. This transformation was interpreted by some audiences as a reflection of how people, too, can become monsters in the eyes of society after experiencing violence, trauma, or systemic interference. George's eventual recovery of his senses and control offered a redemptive arc that many found cathartic. Among adult audiences, especially those who grew up in the 1980s and 1990s, Rampage tapped into a unique kind of nostalgia. The original arcade game held a special place in gaming history, and for those who played it in malls and arcades during their youth, the film adaptation felt like a time capsule wrapped in modern Hollywood spectacle. The destruction of buildings, the exaggerated size of the monsters, and the chaos of urban combat evoked memories of classic Godzilla films, B-movie creature features, and Saturday afternoon matinees. This nostalgic appeal allowed some viewers to forgive the film's logical gaps or scientific implausibilities and just enjoy it for what it was: a fun, loud, and energetic ride. Young viewers, especially children and teenagers, responded to the film's pacing and visual spectacle. For this demographic, the themes of heroism, friendship, and teamwork were easy to grasp and inspiring. Dwayne Johnson's character, Davis, was viewed as a protector figure, not only saving George but also humanity, and doing so without superpowers or political authority. He was simply a smart, strong, and compassionate man who used his knowledge and empathy to solve a problem bigger than himself. Many younger audience members interpreted him as a role model figure, someone who values life, science, and loyalty over violence or revenge. Another demographic that found an unexpected connection with Rampage was the international audience, particularly in regions where American-style blockbuster films are popular but often viewed through a different cultural lens. In countries like China, India, Brazil, and parts of Europe, audiences appreciated the universal themes of human-animal connection and the battle against corporate greed. The antagonists in the film, Claire and Brett Wyden, represent a stereotypical view of corporate corruption, willing to sacrifice lives and cities for profit. This dynamic resonated in many cultures where the struggle against unethical corporations is a lived reality. For some, Rampage became an allegory for standing up against those in power who misuse science and technology for selfish ends. In online spaces, Rampage generated a wide range of interpretations, memes, and discussions. Fans took to forums and social media to discuss the emotional arc of George, the comedic moments between him and Davis, and even to speculate on the possible future of the characters after the end of the film. Some online users began drawing parallels between George and other sympathetic monsters in pop culture such as King Kong, Hulk, or even Frankenstein's monster. These interpretations highlighted the ongoing cultural fascination with the misunderstood giant, the creature who, despite terrifying appearances, still holds a deeply human heart. Some viewers reflected on the idea of genetic modification and bioengineering, viewing the film through a science fiction lens. Though the movie's depiction of genetic manipulation is far from realistic, it still sparked casual conversations among some audiences about the ethics of altering living organisms for human purposes. In a time when CRISPR gene editing technology and biotechnological advances are making headlines, Rampage tapped into public curiosity and anxiety about what science can and should do. For these viewers, the film served as an entertaining but cautionary tale about the hubris of manipulating nature without fully understanding the consequences. There were also audiences who connected with Rampage on a more emotional level due to its themes of loss, especially relating to George's transformation and the implied backstory of Davis Okoye. While the film only lightly touches on Davis's past as a soldier and his decision to leave human society behind for the company of animals, viewers inferred that his connection with George was partially a response to past trauma or disillusionment. This gave depth to their bond and allowed viewers who had experienced loss or alienation to project their own feelings onto the story. In this way, Rampage became not just a monster movie, but a story about chosen family and emotional healing. Audiences also appreciated the film's moments of humor and lightness. The interplay between George and Davis, especially their use of sign language and George's occasional rude gestures, provided comic relief that balanced the otherwise intense action. Viewers enjoyed the fact that the film didn't take itself too seriously. In an era where many blockbuster films try to be epic or self-important, Rampage's lighter tone was a refreshing change. The levity helped make the destruction less grim and the monsters more endearing, especially for younger or more sensitive viewers. Some interpretations, particularly among more analytical viewers, explored the symbolic meaning behind the three mutated animals: George the gorilla, Ralph the wolf, and Lizzie the crocodile. To these viewers, each creature represented different aspects of unchecked evolution or human influence on nature. George, being the most human-like, retained his moral compass and ability to empathize. Ralph, as a predator transformed into a flying terror, symbolized the consequences of giving power to those who already dominate through fear. Lizzie, the monstrous crocodile, represented ancient, primal forces being weaponized in unnatural ways. This symbolic reading allowed audiences to find deeper meaning in what might otherwise seem like simple monster designs. In a film like Rampage, which is dominated by large-scale action, monster mayhem, and fast-paced storytelling, one might not expect deep or meaningful character development. However, beneath the destruction and spectacle, the film introduces a number of key characters whose personal journeys and relationships bring emotional grounding and narrative cohesion to the story. While the character arcs in Rampage are relatively straightforward and often follow familiar tropes, they are essential to making the audience care about the outcome, particularly in a story where the threat is largely external and overwhelming. At the heart of the story is Davis Okoye, played by Dwayne Johnson. Davis is a former Special Forces soldier turned primatologist who now works at the San Diego Wildlife Sanctuary. His backstory is hinted at rather than fully explored, but it is clear that he has chosen a life among animals because he has become disillusioned with humanity. He expresses early in the film that he prefers animals over people because animals don't lie, betray, or harm without reason. This statement reveals a man who has been emotionally wounded, possibly by war or betrayal, and who has chosen to withdraw into a simpler world where loyalty and truth are more straightforward. Davis's character arc is centered around reconnection and responsibility. His relationship with George, the albino gorilla he rescued and raised, serves as both a literal and symbolic link between his past and present. George represents trust, companionship, and purpose. When George is exposed to the pathogen and begins to grow in size and aggression, Davis is thrust into a situation that forces him back into a leadership role and a world filled with chaos and human conflict. He cannot remain a passive observer of nature anymore. He must engage with people, institutions, and danger to save his friend and, ultimately, the world. Throughout the film, Davis transitions from a guarded, solitary figure to someone willing to risk his life not only for George but for strangers, cities, and humanity at large. This shift is gradual but clear. His interactions with Dr. Kate Caldwell, a former geneticist who becomes his partner in the mission, help bring out his sense of trust and cooperation with others. By the film's end, Davis is no longer isolated. He's become a leader again, a protector not only of George but of the people around him. He also reclaims a sense of control and moral clarity that had been buried under layers of disillusionment. George, while a non-human character, undergoes perhaps the most compelling transformation in the film. Initially introduced as a playful, intelligent, and affectionate gorilla with a sense of humor, George is immediately likable and emotionally accessible to the audience. His ability to use sign language allows for a level of communication that gives him personality, agency, and emotional complexity. Once he is exposed to the pathogen, George undergoes both a physical and behavioral change. He becomes larger, stronger, and more aggressive, lashing out in fear and confusion. What makes George's arc impactful is that, despite his outward transformation into what appears to be a monster, his core personality remains intact. He is not evil or malicious. He is frightened and in pain. As the film progresses and his relationship with Davis is tested, George begins to regain his composure, especially after Davis confronts and calms him. This moment, where Davis reaches George emotionally through their bond, is a turning point. George begins to resist the violent impulses caused by the genetic mutation and instead chooses to fight on the side of good. By the climax of the film, George has fully reclaimed his identity. He helps Davis defeat the other mutated creatures, risking his life to stop the destruction. In the final moments, after pretending to die and then revealing it was a joke, George's sense of humor returns, solidifying that his true self survived the ordeal. George's arc is a journey through chaos and back to self-awareness, symbolizing the struggle to remain true to oneself even when altered by forces beyond one's control. Dr. Kate Caldwell, played by Naomie Harris, also undergoes a significant, if understated, transformation. She begins the story as a disgraced geneticist who had once worked for the film's villains, the Wyden siblings. Kate's past is marked by regret and guilt, having been manipulated into creating the very genetic editing technology that caused the crisis. Her arc is one of redemption. She seeks to undo the damage she helped create, and her partnership with Davis allows her to prove her value beyond her past mistakes. Kate's intelligence, moral compass, and determination make her a valuable member of the team. Throughout the film, she becomes more assertive, taking on dangerous missions, confronting the villains, and using her knowledge to guide the solution. By the end of the film, Kate has reclaimed her sense of purpose and integrity. She is no longer running from her past but actively fighting to correct it. While her emotional arc is more subtle than Davis's or George's, it is no less meaningful. She represents the theme of second chances and the importance of using knowledge ethically. The villains of the story, Claire and Brett Whiten serve primarily as archetypal representations of corporate greed and moral corruption. Claire Whiten is the dominant sibling, cold, calculated, and ruthless. Her arc is static in the sense that she does not change or grow. She is a cautionary figure rather than a redemptive one. Claire's role is to demonstrate the dangers of scientific advancement in the wrong hands. Her eventual death at the hands of George, who throws her to the monstrous Lizzie, serves as poetic justice. Her fate underscores the film's message that exploitation and hubris lead to self-destruction. Brett Whiten, her brother, is portrayed as cowardly and incompetent, lacking the conviction or intelligence to carry out the evil plans he claims to support. His arc is similarly flat, though it serves a narrative function by contrasting the serious heroism of Davis and Kate with the frivolous, self-serving attitude of those in power. Both Whiten siblings meet fitting ends, reinforcing the theme that those who manipulate nature for profit without understanding its consequences are doomed to fail. Other supporting characters include Harvey Russell, played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, who starts out as a shadowy government agent with unclear motives. Russell's character arc involves a shift from antagonist to ally. At first, he seems to be working against Davis and George, enforcing the government's containment protocols. However, as he witnesses Davis's commitment and George's intelligence, Russell begins to respect them and ultimately helps them. His transformation into a more sympathetic character adds depth to the story, illustrating that even within institutions, individuals can choose to act with integrity. Even the mutated animals Ralph and Lizzie can be seen to have rudimentary arcs. While they do not have the same emotional layers as George, their transformations from ordinary animals into monstrous creatures mirror George's experience, but without the benefit of human connection or emotional grounding. In a film like Rampage, where massive creatures destroy entire cities and the narrative is driven by action, science fiction, and government operations, the costume and set design play a critical but often underappreciated role in anchoring the audience in a believable and immersive world. Unlike fantasy or period dramas, the world of Rampage is grounded in a contemporary setting, yet it also includes heightened elements such as advanced genetic experimentation, mutated beasts, and high-stakes military responses. This blend of realism and exaggeration requires careful attention to both visual realism and stylized storytelling through design. Starting with costume design, the characters' wardrobes are intentionally practical, contemporary, and closely aligned with their professions and personalities. The protagonist, Davis Okoye, played by Dwayne Johnson, wears attire that reinforces his identity as a rugged, action-oriented man of science. Throughout most of the film, Davis is dressed in neutral-toned, functional clothing, tactical cargo pants, boots, and simple, form-fitting t-shirts. This wardrobe emphasizes both his physicality and his hands-on approach to work. He is not a lab coat scientist, but someone who interacts directly with wildlife in the field. His clothing is often scuffed, dirty, and torn by the end of scenes, reflecting the intense physical environments he navigates. The simplicity of his costume also helps keep the focus on his emotional expressions and physical performance, making him relatable and grounded. His wardrobe subtly evolves throughout the movie. While it remains largely consistent in terms of color palette and practicality, it begins to reflect more urgency and militaristic influence as the plot escalates. As he moves from being a scientist in a sanctuary to someone fighting alongside soldiers and facing city-leveling threats, his clothing reflects a shift in role, from observer to protector. Without needing a costume change into military gear or superhero-like attire, the costume designers keep him in relatable, functional clothing while letting the wear and tear of his wardrobe communicate his journey. Dr. Kate Caldwell, portrayed by Naomie Harris, presents a contrasting but complementary visual design. Her costumes reflect her background in science and academia while also signaling her capacity to adapt to dangerous and high-pressure situations. At first, Kate wears a slightly more formal and reserved look, a blazer, slacks, and flat shoes, indicating her scientific professionalism and a life previously shaped by corporate lab work. As she is thrust into the action, her wardrobe shifts to more comfortable, mobile attire. The transition is subtle but effective, showing her evolution from a former corporate scientist burdened by past mistakes to an active participant in the mission to stop the Rampage. Kate's color palette remains largely subdued, much like Davis's, which visually reinforces their compatibility and partnership. Neutral colors, such as grays and earth tones, dominate her look, grounding her in the same harsh reality the characters face. Her clothing is not overly stylized, which helps audiences see her as intelligent, determined, and pragmatic. The lack of ostentation in her costume speaks to her no-nonsense attitude and aligns with the film's tone. Harvey Russell, the shady yet charismatic government agent played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, stands out among the main cast in terms of costume design. His wardrobe is deliberately more stylized and character-driven. Wearing a cowboy-style leather belt, a pearl-handled pistol, boots, and a tailored jacket, Russell's look combines Old West motifs with modern federal authority. This contrast makes him a visually interesting character and distinguishes him from the rest of the cast. It's clear that the costume designers intended for Russell to represent an unconventional, maverick government figure, someone who doesn't follow the rules by the book. His costume becomes an extension of his personality, confident, cryptic, and a little unpredictable. On the opposite end of the spectrum are Claire and Brett Wyden, the corporate villains behind the genetic experiments. Claire, played by Malin Ackerman, is portrayed in sleek, high-fashion business attire, pencil skirts, heels, crisp blouses, and tailored blazers. Her wardrobe is cold and calculated, much like her character. The sharp lines and minimalist color scheme, mostly black, gray, and white, visually signal her as a character of control, power, and a lack of emotional depth. She is presented as the embodiment of corporate evil, and her costuming reinforces that image by keeping her always composed and immaculately styled, even amid chaos. Brett, her brother, is costumed in less refined business wear, often slightly disheveled and lighter in tone, emphasizing his role as a weaker, more comedic foil to Claire's calculated presence. Moving on to set design, Rampage spans a diverse range of environments, each meticulously crafted to reflect the escalating stakes and diverse tones of the story. The film opens in a wildlife sanctuary in San Diego, a tranquil and naturalistic setting that emphasizes harmony and safety. The sanctuary is filled with greenery, enclosures, and open landscapes. This serene setting helps establish Davis's connection to nature and contrasts with the chaos that unfolds later. The gorilla habitat is especially notable, designed with both realism and personality. It serves as the first place where we see Davis and George interact, highlighting their deep bond. The film then transitions to increasingly hostile and confined environments, corporate labs, military installations, and eventually the chaos of urban destruction in Chicago. The Energyne Lab, where the genetic experiments originated, is designed with sleek, sterile lines, bright white lighting, and advanced technological props. It feels inhuman, cold, and clinical, an appropriate visual metaphor for the moral detachment of the corporation. These interior spaces are devoid of warmth or personality, contrasting starkly with the natural world that Davis cherishes. Even the lighting in these scenes is cooler and harsher, supporting the theme of unchecked technological power and corruption. As the film progresses, we're introduced to military bases and aircraft, which are shot and designed with realism and functional efficiency. The props, technology, and uniforms are grounded in contemporary military aesthetics, giving the film a certain believability despite its outlandish premise. The military response feels plausible and grounded, providing a sharp visual contrast to the rampaging monsters and the crumbling cities they cause. Perhaps the most visually arresting set design element is the destruction of downtown Chicago. The filmmakers created massive cityscape sets, some of which were built practically and later extended with CGI, to simulate skyscrapers collapsing, debris flying, and streets being torn apart. These sets had to accommodate both live-action performances and digital effects, so their construction was a careful collaboration between production designers, stunt teams, and VFX supervisors. The city becomes a character in itself during the final act, with its buildings falling like dominoes and landmarks being destroyed in spectacular fashion. The screenplay of Rampage, 2018, operates within the framework of a high-concept action-adventure film. It is not a film that relies on lyrical dialogue, poetic exchanges, or profound monologues, but rather one that prioritizes clarity, energy, and momentum. The dialogue serves multiple functions: to deliver exposition quickly, to reveal key aspects of character personality, to move the plot forward with urgency, and to occasionally inject humor or levity in between scenes of destruction and tension. The script, written by Ryan Engel, Carlton Cuse, Ryan J. Condal, and Adam Steichel, is designed to complement the film's fast-paced tone and blockbuster sensibility. One of the more interesting aspects of Rampage's script is how it balances its outrageous premise, genetically modified animals wreaking havoc on a major city, with grounded, accessible language. The dialogue is structured to help the audience suspend disbelief. It uses scientific jargon sparingly and pairs it with explanations that make sense to a general audience without sounding overly technical. This choice ensures that viewers stay engaged without feeling overwhelmed by science fiction concepts. For example, when characters discuss CRISPR gene editing or pathogen transmission, the dialogue tends to explain these ideas in digestible chunks, often through conversations that double as exposition. A common technique used in the script is the exposition through conflict method, where characters reveal critical plot details while simultaneously engaging in arguments, debates, or tense exchanges. This keeps the energy high and avoids long, flat stretches of explanatory dialogue. When Kate Caldwell first appears and tries to convince Davis of the dangers posed by the Energyne Company, their dialogue is emotionally charged. She is desperate and regretful, while he is skeptical and guarded. The tension between them drives the conversation, allowing the audience to absorb key information about her past, the genetic experiments, and the stakes at hand without it feeling like a lecture. The script also makes strategic use of character-defining dialogue. Davis Okoye, portrayed by Dwayne Johnson, is written with a voice that reflects his background. Former Special Forces, now a primatologist with a deep affinity for animals and a guarded attitude toward people. His lines are often short, practical, and tinged with dry humor. Early in the film, he jokes with George, the albino gorilla, using sign language and crude humor, revealing both his sense of humor and the depth of their bond. Later, his verbal sparring with military personnel or corporate representatives reflects his frustration with authority and his protective instincts. Jeffrey Dean Morgan's character, Harvey Russell, is the most stylized in terms of dialogue. The script gives him a deliberately distinctive speech pattern, a southern drawl, folksy idioms, and a tone of smug confidence. Lines like, "When science shits the bed, I'm the guy they call to clean the sheets," stand out because of their flavor and rhythm. His dialogue adds comic relief and a touch of unpredictability to the film. It's clear the writers enjoyed crafting his character's voice, giving him quips and metaphors that add personality to scenes that might otherwise be dominated by exposition or action. The villains, Claire and Brett Wyden, are written in a more straightforward, archetypal manner. Their dialogue emphasizes control, ambition, and moral detachment. Claire speaks in a clipped, calculated manner, using short sentences and corporate buzzwords. Her lines often come across as cold and goal-oriented, devoid of emotional depth, which aligns with her role as the antagonist. Brett, in contrast, is written as more cowardly and incompetent. His dialogue includes nervous stammering, complaints, and moments of comic panic, serving as a counterbalance to Claire's ruthlessness. This dynamic between the two siblings offers not only narrative tension but tonal variety, blending menace with moments of satirical incompetence. Humor in the screenplay is used sparingly but effectively. The jokes are not dense or complex, but they are timed well and rooted in character. Most of the humor comes from the banter between Davis and George, the absurdity of certain situations, and Russell's colorful expressions. For example, one recurring gag is George flipping off Davis using sign language, which adds both levity and a sense of familiarity between them. These small comedic beats provide necessary breathing room between high-stakes sequences and catastrophic events. The pacing of the dialogue matches the structure of the film's narrative, which is tight and forward-driving. Scenes rarely linger longer than necessary, and dialogue is edited to keep up with the film's brisk tempo. Even in scenes where characters are explaining complex ideas or emotional backstories, the conversations are structured to keep things moving. There is little room for introspection or slow-burning philosophical discussions. The script opts instead for quick exchanges, sharp comebacks, and decisive verbal moves that mirror the constant escalation in the story's action. One of the strengths of the screenplay lies in its use of silence and nonverbal communication, particularly between Davis and George. While not strictly dialogue, the sign language exchanges between them are a vital part of the script. They convey emotion, humor, and shared history in a way that spoken dialogue might not. The filmmakers were careful to include moments where body language and facial expressions said more than words. This is especially important in a film where one of the central characters is a giant gorilla who doesn't speak, but remains emotionally central to the story. The sign language exchanges offer both authenticity and a unique layer of connection that deepens the emotional stakes. Although Rampage is not a film that many would cite for profound or groundbreaking writing, its script is more sophisticated than it may first appear. Crafting a screenplay that supports giant monster battles while also maintaining character coherence, emotional clarity, and plot progression is no easy task. The writers were tasked with integrating action, science fiction, humor, and emotional resonance into a coherent narrative. This required a script that was flexible, tonally balanced, and efficient in language. Dialogue is also used effectively to raise moral and ethical questions, albeit in a simplified manner. Through characters like Kate Caldwell and Davis Okoye, the script touches on themes of corporate greed, scientific responsibility, and the consequences of human manipulation of nature. Kate's regret over her involvement in the project that led to the monster's creation is evident in how she speaks about her past. She's not given long monologues, but her concise, direct lines about guilt and redemption resonate within the film's larger context. Davis, too, communicates his philosophy in brief but meaningful ways, emphasizing his trust in animals over humans and his belief in loyalty and protection. The marketing and promotion of Rampage, 2018, followed the blueprint of a modern blockbuster, combining traditional advertising methods with newer, digital-first strategies to build anticipation and attract a wide global audience. As a film loosely based on a classic 1980s arcade game and starring one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, Dwayne Johnson, Rampage was marketed as a high-octane action adventure with broad appeal. The promotional campaign was carefully orchestrated to emphasize the film's spectacle, humor, and star power, while also drawing in fans of the original game and genre enthusiasts. The campaign officially began in late 2017 with the release of the first teaser trailer. This initial preview emphasized the emotional bond between Johnson's character, Davis Okoye, and the genetically altered albino gorilla, George. It then pivoted into showcasing the chaos caused by the three giant monsters rampaging across Chicago. The trailer introduced audiences to the basic premise: genetic experimentation gone wrong leading to monstrous creatures attacking a major city, while highlighting some of the film's more impressive visual effects. By pairing big action with a surprisingly emotional undercurrent, the trailer aimed to hook audiences beyond just fans of the creature feature genre. The film's marketing leaned heavily on the charisma and popularity of Dwayne Johnson, who played a key role in promoting Rampage across multiple platforms. Johnson used his massive social media following on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook to create direct engagement with fans. He shared behind-the-scenes photos, videos from the set, training montages, and even humorous anecdotes about working with the CGI version of George. His involvement turned the marketing into a personality-driven campaign, with Johnson acting as both the face of the film and a promoter who blurred the lines between actor and influencer. His posts routinely garnered millions of views and likes, offering Warner Brothers a valuable marketing pipeline that was organic and personal. Official posters for the film featured epic, towering images of the monsters alongside Johnson's character, often standing defiantly against the destruction. These visuals emphasize scale, danger, and heroism. In most iterations, the posters featured George prominently to suggest the emotional core of the story, while the giant wolf, Ralph, and the mutated crocodile, Lizzie, were shown in the background to tease the escalation of the threat. The tagline "Big meets bigger" was used in several marketing materials to reinforce the over-the-top nature of the action. Rampage also benefited from a highly visible presence at pop culture events and conventions. Warner Brothers showcased the film during San Diego Comic-Con and other fan-centric festivals, offering sneak peeks, exclusive footage, and branded merchandise. In some cases, full-scale replicas of the monsters were displayed to create immersive experiences for fans and influencers. These physical marketing efforts were aimed at sparking social media buzz and driving word-of-mouth interest. The film's video game roots were subtly acknowledged in the marketing campaign. Although Rampage the movie took a more serious tone compared to the tongue-in-cheek nature of the original arcade game, nods to its origins were included for fans. The title font, monster designs, and some Easter eggs in promotional content paid homage to the 1980s source material. However, the campaign generally avoided relying too heavily on nostalgia, choosing instead to focus on its modern reinterpretation and widescreen spectacle. In the digital space, Warner Brothers launched a fully interactive website for Rampage that allowed users to explore the story, characters, and behind-the-scenes content. Visitors could interact with models of the monsters, simulate destruction on a city map, and view character profiles. Several online games and mobile tie-ins were developed as promotional tools, allowing users to join the Rampage in a gamified experience that linked back to the original arcade concept. In addition, the film was promoted through video ads on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, with trailers and TV spots tailored for mobile viewing. Television advertisements became more prominent in the weeks leading up to the release. Multiple TV spots were released, each emphasizing different elements. One might focus on the emotional bond between Davis and George, another might highlight the destruction in Chicago, and others would tease humorous moments to attract a more general audience. These ads played across major networks and during sporting events, including the NFL playoffs and March Madness, ensuring they reached a broad demographic. A particularly unique promotional effort involved limited-time brand partnerships. For instance, Rampage collaborated with primatology groups and wildlife conservation organizations to create educational tie-ins. While the film itself is a work of fiction, these efforts helped connect its themes to real-world animal welfare discussions, particularly regarding primates. Dwayne Johnson even posted videos promoting these partnerships, helping position the film not just as a source of entertainment, but as a conversation starter. International marketing played a key role in the film's promotional strategy as well. Given that Rampage had clear global appeal, with its large-scale destruction, universally understandable plot, and major star at the center, it was marketed aggressively in overseas markets, particularly in China. Unique posters and trailers were created for different regions, and international premieres and press tours were held across Asia, Europe, and Latin America. The film's title and tagline were localized to suit regional tastes, and Johnson's global fame helped attract attention in markets where Hollywood action films typically perform well. In terms of merchandising, Rampage featured a line of action figures, collectibles, and apparel. Toy companies produced figurines of George, Ralph, and Lizzie, each designed with movable parts and packaged with background information about the creatures. Clothing brands sold t-shirts and hoodies with monster designs and movie artwork. Promotional giveaways at theaters included collectible cups, posters, and miniature figurines. Although the film didn't generate the kind of massive merchandising campaign seen with franchises like Jurassic World or Transformers, it still developed a dedicated range of consumer products to appeal to fans and collectors. The final phase of promotion involved early reviews, screenings, and influencer marketing. Select critics and social media influencers were invited to attend preview screenings in major cities, where they were encouraged to share first impressions under embargo rules. Once the embargo lifted, early reviews were released with the intent of generating buzz and helping fence-sitting audiences make a decision. While reviews were mixed, many praised the film's entertainment value, which helped maintain momentum heading into opening weekend. Viral marketing was also used, albeit modestly. Humorous GIFs, memes, and short video clips from the film were released and reshared across social media, often focusing on George's personality or the absurdity of the monster fights. fans began creating their own edits and tributes, which added an organic layer of community participation. Warner Brothers capitalized on this by resharing popular fan-made content through official channels. Rampage, 2018, occupies a unique space in modern cinema, bridging the gap between video game adaptations, monster movies, and big-budget action blockbusters. While it can be seen as a standalone film, its creative DNA is a patchwork of influences, drawing from decades of monster cinema, earlier attempts at video game adaptations, and even elements from films starring its lead actor, Dwayne Johnson. When compared to other films in these categories, Rampage stands out in some aspects while remaining familiar in others. To begin with, Rampage can be compared directly to other video game adaptations. The genre has long struggled with critical success, with many films failing to capture the essence of the source material or collapsing under poor writing and direction. Early examples like Street Fighter, 1994, Super Mario Bros., 1993, and Doom, 2005, are often remembered for their campy tone or deviation from the source material. In contrast, Rampage took a different approach. Instead of trying to translate a detailed, narrative-rich video game into film, it adapted a very simple arcade game with no real story, giving filmmakers the freedom to create their own plot while using the title and monster destruction theme as inspiration. This allowed Rampage to avoid the pitfalls of too much fidelity and instead treat the property as a launching pad for an original monster action movie. As a result, it fared better critically and commercially than many of its predecessors and contemporaries. In terms of tone and structure, Rampage shares a kinship with other Dwayne Johnson-led action films, such as San Andreas, 2015, Skyscraper, 2018, and the Fast and Furious franchise. In all these films, Johnson plays a heroic, physically capable, but emotionally grounded protagonist. His characters are often former military or law enforcement with a personal code of honor, and their relationships, whether with family, friends, or creatures, serve as emotional anchors in the midst of chaos. In Rampage, his bond with George, the gorilla, mirrors the type of personal stakes seen in San Andreas, where Johnson's character was motivated by his love for his daughter amid natural disaster. This formula of combining over-the-top action with personal stakes has become a hallmark of Johnson's brand and is fully on display in Rampage. In comparison, Rampage feels more lighthearted and comic book-like than some of his other roles, particularly due to the inclusion of massive CGI monsters and the tongue-in-cheek nature of the plot. Rampage also fits into the long tradition of monster films, particularly those involving giant creatures attacking cities. In that regard, it invites comparisons to the Godzilla and King Kong franchises. Both Godzilla, 2014, and Kong, Skull Island, 2017, were recent entries in Legendary Pictures' Monsterverse around the same time Rampage was released. While Rampage is not part of that cinematic universe, its tone and style bear similarities, especially in the depiction of large-scale destruction and creature battles. Where Godzilla films often carry allegorical weight, such as nuclear anxiety or environmental commentary, Rampage leans more into fun, escapist action. It's less about metaphor and more about spectacle, distinguishing it from the gravitas-laden tone of Godzilla and the mythological tone of Kong. However, Rampage's monster designs, particularly Lizzie the Crocodile, do echo kaiju aesthetics, making it feel like a cousin to those films. Another useful point of comparison is Pacific Rim, 2013, another American kaiju film involving giant creatures and large-scale battles. While Pacific Rim focused on humans piloting giant robots to battle interdimensional monsters, it similarly leaned into the thrill of large-scale destruction with vivid, CGI-heavy action sequences. Rampage, however, grounded its story more in science fiction and biotechnology rather than extraterrestrial threats. Pacific Rim carried a more stylized, anime-inspired look and tone, while Rampage maintained a gritty, real-world aesthetic, particularly in its city destruction scenes. Both films share a love for monster spectacle, but Rampage's more grounded approach and use of a genetically modified gorilla as a sympathetic character helped it feel more personal, despite its outlandish premise. If we examine Rampage through the lens of disaster cinema, It echoes films like Independence Day, 1996, and Cloverfield, 2008. In these films, massive destruction plays out across familiar cityscapes, and humanity scrambles to survive or fight back. Rampage channels that same energy, though with a more comedic and action hero tone. While Independence Day relied on patriotic themes and a large ensemble cast, Rampage focuses more intimately on a handful of characters, particularly Davis and George. Cloverfield, with its found footage style, was more about immersion and horror, while Rampage opts for clarity and big movie spectacle. Despite these tonal differences, the core elements, urban devastation, scientific experimentation gone wrong, and the blending of action with horror, are shared among these films. When compared to earlier adaptations or reimaginings of arcade and retro video games, Rampage holds its own surprisingly well. Many attempts to revive classic properties have struggled to connect with modern audiences due to dated premises or poor execution. Rampage managed to walk a fine line by embracing the absurdity of its concept while modernizing the narrative. It added human and emotional stakes, something most arcade adaptations lacked. It's comparable in this sense to Detective Pikachu, 2019, which took a franchise primarily known for its game mechanics and transformed it into a character-driven story with wide appeal. While Rampage doesn't reach the emotional depth of Detective Pikachu or the comedic polish of Sonic the Hedgehog, 2020, it successfully modernized a non-narrative game in a way that made it accessible and enjoyable to both longtime fans and newcomers. It's also worth contrasting Rampage with films by its director, Brad Peyton. Peyton previously collaborated with Dwayne Johnson on Journey to The Mysterious Island, 2012, and San Andreas, 2015. Both films share thematic and stylistic similarities with Rampage. Peyton's directorial style emphasizes large-scale visual effects, dramatic action sequences, and emotionally driven stories. His partnership with Johnson has been key to the success of these projects, and Rampage continues that pattern. Of the three films, Rampage arguably has the most absurd premise, yet Peyton's consistent tone and pacing keep it grounded enough to remain believable within its own universe. Compared to Journey 2's whimsical tone and San Andreas' disaster realism, Rampage finds a middle ground, a mix of comic book logic, monster mayhem, and emotional sincerity.